I was excited about this, but this first episode is really bad. It's probably the worst episode. It's not even probably. It is the worst episode of Strange New Worlds so far. Welcome, everybody, to Nerd Legion, our newest show here on Last Free Nation. Long promised, finally delivered, with myself and my lovely former commentating partner, DoA. I know many of you guys missed...
I'm lovely.
You are lovely. I know many of you guys missed how we used to have those things you called the OGN podcast, where we just riffed on Star Wars, Jurassic Park, Star Trek, whatever, nerd fandom. And we asked ourselves, why don't we just make our own podcast about this, doing sci-fi and fantasy films and TV week by week? Luckily, DoA, these days there is just so much, let's be honest, garbage out there.
It's a nerd culture extravaganza.
Fire.
You say dumpster fire, I say extravaganza. The truth is somewhere in the middle, and we will find it.
The truth is a piece of garbage in the dumpster that is not yet on fire.
It's a flaming extravaganza.
So we have a lot of shows that we are going to cover. Obviously, there's tons of Marvel shows coming out these days. There's like 5 Star Trek shows for some reason. There's going to be like 5 Star Wars shows.
Yeah.
They keep doing things like making Willow remakes for no reason. Wheel of
They've
Time.
only done that once so far. To be fair, they've only done that once so far.
Well, knowing Hollywood, in 3 years they're going to do another Willow remake, because we have to have 10 iterations of Spider-Man as well.
We got to make Willow's like backstory even more tragic this time. It's like, oh, it turns out things never worked out. This is my first point. All right, I'm going to let you continue your intro in a moment, but I just want to say this. Why, whenever we bring these things back, Star Wars sequels, Willow, why has there always had to be some sort of like horrible tragedy for our heroes? You know, it's like we'd like to think everything went well after Jedi. Nope. Went pretty bad, actually, for everyone. We like to think things went well after the movie Willow. Nope. Turns out things weren't so great. It's like, why can't things just be going well? Anyway, I digress.
I
take issue with that.
I blame Stephen Sondheim and Into the Woods. Anyway.
Fair point.
I think that's where it all started. I blame Sondheim. Anyway, we are going to be doing this week by week. So this week, guys, we're going to be doing Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And I think what's cool about both DoA and my fandom is that we're often like hardcore fans of different things, and one of us is usually kind of newer to the thing that the other one's a hardcore fan of. So it actually, I think, will create a very interesting dynamic, because we're starting this week with Strange New Worlds, and I'm a big Star Trek fan, but DoA perhaps is not as big of a Star Trek fan as I am.
Who would have guessed? Star Trek or Star Wars for me. But I mean, I should say I've watched a lot of Star Trek over the years. I mean, I haven't watched the original series. I've never gone back and done that. But I have watched through Next Generation 2 or 3 times at this point. I've watched through DS9 1.5 times. But it was one of the things where like my dad was really into it when I was a kid, and I never really appreciated it until I became an adult and went back and watched it. And I was like, oh, this is really awesome, actually. And then they started making all the new stuff. And as a Star Wars fan, it's like, oh, they're just kind of trying to make Trek like Star Wars. But there's like different things that have happened since like 2009 was the new Trek movie with the new cast and everything, right?
I don't know what year that came out. I saw all of those, but I was not particularly impressed. So my Star Trek fandom, so Deep Space Nine is probably my favorite TV show ever, and I've seen it 3 or 4 times. I'm a huge Next Generation fan. That is among my favorite TV shows ever. I have seen all of Voyager. I've seen a good chunk of the original series. I've seen all the movies. I watched Enterprise. I have willfully not watched Discovery and Picard because I know they're bad.
I watched a couple episodes of Discovery, and I that was enough for me.
So here's the thing about me. I will, if I think something's going to ruin my experience of a particular intellectual property, I simply am not going to watch it. Like, I still haven't seen the 4th Indiana Jones movie, although I will be forced as a result of this show to watch the 5th Indiana Jones movie later this month.
Yes.
So we can discuss it here.
But it was
so you guys,
worth it.
you guys will just hear me malding about this stuff over time, because I will watch it because DoA wants to talk about it, not because I want to watch it. But for your own entertainment, right, I'm sure it will be quite amusing. But this is all to say, like, I am a fan of 90s era Star Trek. I don't think much of Voyager. I haven't seen Discovery. I haven't seen Picard, although I did hear season 3 was a lot better. I know seasons 1 and 2 were basically the plot of Mass Effect, which wasn't particularly interesting to me because I already played Mass Effect.
It was not good. But I did watch seasons 1 and 2.
So I did hear good things about Strange New World season 1. So I did watch that. And just to get my initial impressions out of the way, it is a decent series. It is a decent series. I will caveat that with the first episode of season 2, which we are going to discuss at length today, was complete garbage. It was really bad. And as this show is going to work, because Star Trek is coming out week by week, we are going to talk about kind of a new episode of Strange New Worlds is coming out next week. And then we're also going to talk about an episode of Black Mirror. And also, what's the Marvel show that's coming out? Secret Invasion?
Oh, Secret Invasion. Right.
So we'll talk about that next week as well.
It's not very secret, I guess. Yeah.
Obvious invasion. But this week we're going to talk about Star Trek Strange New Worlds season 1. And then also talk more at length about the first episode of season 2. So overall impressions, DoA, Star Trek Strange New Worlds season 1.
I feel like this is the type of thing that I should like, right? But there's just something about it. And it's my general take on Strange New Worlds is that they've acknowledged the fact that Trek has gotten too dark. It's gotten like too edgy and dark and grim and all the stuff, and it's like, oh, it turns out the Federation like didn't do a good job, and the Earth is like, if you watch the first 2 seasons of Picard, it's like the most depressing thing that's ever been made in the Star Trek universe.
Which is not what I like about Star Trek, by the way.
Yeah,
even Deep Space Nine, when it got to its kind of like darkest in the Dominion War arc, still had this optimism about it that Gene Roddenberry really wanted to push forward, that it was at its core a hopeful vision of humanity's future.
Yes, and I think that's the thing that's greatest about Star Trek, right? And this is the thing that like initially appealed to me about games like Overwatch as well, is that it paints a positive view of the future, which is kind of great, right? Because everybody likes to be pessimistic about the future, but what if it's not, right? And so Star Trek is kind of that cool thing. And then so obviously there's still challenges, there's still problems, but we have the the attitude and the technology and sort of like the state of mind to deal with it in a healthier way, right? So that's what kind of made Star Trek neat back in like the TNG days and all that kind of stuff. DS9 for a certain extent, but Strange New Worlds, I feel like tries to go back to that a little bit, where they do try to make it more positive. They do try to make it more, it's definitely lighter, right? It's definitely more action packed than any of the old Trek, but I feel like that's just kind of what you get these days. Like you can't make a show without action apparently. Except Andor exists, and there's like basically no action in that, and it's really good.
It is very
good. But turns out Star Trek, the series that traditionally was mostly talking and exposition and very little action, now thinks it needs all this action. So I would say it's fun, but it's okay.
I think it's a good entry point to Star Trek. So I've had a lot of people like mention this to me, like if I haven't watched Star Trek before, is Strange New Worlds good? And the answer is probably yes, actually, because it returns to kind of the original series and Next Generation model, which is back before we had video on demand. And remember that Star Trek used to be made at a clip of like 26 episodes per year per series. So there was 26 episodes per year for 7 years of Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. So they actually had to film these so quickly that it relied very heavily on the writing and the acting, which to your point, DoA, was a lot of talking because they didn't have, first off, it was the mid 90s and into the late 90s. They didn't have necessarily the CGI technology, especially cheaply enough to deploy it on TV shows at that time. But also it wasn't prestige TV. It wasn't big budget TV. It was relative to the time, but they really had to crank these out. I mean, these actors and writers were just grinding for, almost a decade to push out this many episodes. And so it was a lot more hit or miss as a result. Like, famously Star Trek some episodes are really good, some episodes are just absolutely terrible, but the sum whole, I think, of DS9 and Next Gen is pretty good. But it's a big commitment to watch these shows, whereas now we have TV shows that are 10 episodes long. They're longer, number one. They're not 42 minutes. They now can be an hour or more. And they have more action, and they're a little bit like more, I would say epic in terms of the production quality. But I agree with your point that it was never action that was the focus of Star Trek. It was kind of philosophy. It was philosophy and interactions and kind of it had an emotional core to it that was very important. Character development was really huge, even though it was kind of an adventure of the week. But the reason behind that is because video on demand didn't exist, DVDs didn't exist before this. So if you couldn't just pop in for an episode when it was airing and you missed it, you might miss part of the story, which also made Deep Space Nine really unique because they actually tried to do serialized television in an era where missing an episode was really unfortunate for you as a viewer. So I think it was a very bold move because it was one of the first serialized network TV shows.
Well, so here's the thing. I in my notes for this, I had Star Trek Strange New Worlds is the episode 7 of Star Trek, where it's like it's doing what Star Wars episode 7 tried to do for Star Wars, which is reboot and reintroduce people to the series and be a start off point for new fans, right? Where if you look at Strange New Worlds season 1, it's the same premise as like the original Star Trek, essentially, right? Boldly go explore, meet new civilizations, solve problems here and there. It's the same thing, and it's episodic as well. There is a bit of an ongoing storyline, but it is more episodic than anything. And so it felt like that, right? Where it's like, this is the same type of story with new faces, some familiar faces, right? For some connection points for the old Star Trek fans, but a lot of new faces with the same framework as the old show for new fans to kind of like get into. Yeah. So I think Strange New Worlds, a good way to say it, is the Star Wars episode 7 of Star Trek.
But better.
Yes, but better, but in principle, it's the same thing, right?
Sure. Yeah, in principle,
they're
it's the
doing
same thing.
the same thing in kind of the same way.
This is all to say, if you guys are new to Star Trek, I do think that this is a good entry point. It does hit on a lot of the classic Star Trek tropes, and we can go through season 1 really quick. I mean, it hits on a lot of different science fiction or film tropes. It's not particularly creative, but it is relatively well executed. So I would say it's formulaic and not original, especially if you've seen other Star Trek, because, for example, in the first season that we got of Strange New Worlds, we kind of like go through the checklist of, there's a mystery of a society you have to solve.
Do we? Yeah.
exactly.
There's a couple of them. The aliens episode.
Yeah. So basically, there's an introduction to Christopher Pike, who's played by Anson Mount. Also, by the way, DoA, did you know that this was made by Akiva Goldsman, who has the dubious distinction of having written Batman Forever, Batman and Robin, and A Beautiful Mind? I don't know how you do that. I don't know how the same person writes A Beautiful Mind, wins an Oscar, while also writing the absolute garbage that is Batman Forever and Batman and Robin.
You mean the best Batman movie ever, I think, is what you meant to say. But so the thing is like, when I was watching, this is jumping ahead to the episode 1 talk for season 2, but there's like a crazy amount of like fighting, and it's not really great or entertaining fighting. And I'm like, this is just so weird. Like, why are they putting so much in this? Why are we getting like a 30-minute doctor fight? And and then I went back and looked, and I saw that he was a writer, and I'm like, oh, it's the Batman and Robin guy. Now I understand so much more about the series and all that, because you do see, and obviously there's other people writing on it other than him and all that. There's more people than just that, but I feel like there is a distinct Batman and Robin flavor that sneaks in to Strange New Worlds. It's back of the palate. It's a little bit. It's not flavor forward, we'll say, but it is there. And I actually love that part.
Bring back the nipple suits. Bring back the nipple suits.
Exactly. Why don't all the Star Trek suits have nipples on them? That's the question.
All right. So to kick this off,
it's cold in space. I don't know. I digress.
It does start. So the series does start with Christopher Pike, who's the captain of the Enterprise. This is pre-Kirk, so it's pre the original series, pre the movies in the rebooted universe that you might have seen.
It was
recently.
pre-Kirk. Now it's current Kirk.
Now it's well, sort of, but Kirk is not the
alert.
captain of the Enterprise yet. But I think what's interesting about, I think if you are new to Star Trek, you get the classic, like, you know, Dead Society episode where they're like archaeologists, and you get a little bit of space horror with the Gorn, who they're trying to make scary, even though in the original series, the Gorn were a lizard man. It's like a man in a lizard suit wearing like a gold lame tunic that like throws a rock at Kirk, and they're definitely not scary. So they're rewriting the Gorn to actually be.
Gives it the double shoulder chop.
Yep. So
I remember right. Yeah.
They're trying to make the Gorn more like aliens, and they actually just steal the plot of James Cameron's Aliens movie.
Literally just aliens.
They just literally steal it and just replace the aliens with the Gorn to the degree.
Oh my gosh! Hold on. Yeah, no, go ahead. No, I've got a whole. I've got a bullet point list.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm just so excited about. I've got a bullet point list.
All right, let's talk about
for episode 9, the aliens Gorn episode. There's monsters and bodies. They run around in vents and they dislike cold weather. There's a little girl survivor from the previous people who were there. Like we got our Newt, right? We've got the person who's dealt with the alien before. The one coincidentally female protagonist that's dealt with the alien before. Very Ripley-esque in La'an's experience with the Gorn, of course. And then you have people saying military things like "come on" and "game time," things like that. So you have your kind of space marine lingo going on. You have to use the environment to stop the monster. That's a very aliens kind of thing too. Sent out the airlock and alien, and then aliens they kind of just nuked it, but you get the idea. And then, I guess they did send the queen out the airlock and aliens as well. So yeah, using the environment. There you go.
Well,
and then you've got the
first
noble
alien. They
sacrifice,
send the alien out the airlock.
It's a popular way to deal with aliens, cold and space. Yeah, but so it really does. It is beat for beat, aliens, and I'm like, come on,
they literally ripped off aliens, and they replaced.
Try to be subtle.
So if you, this is all to say, if you haven't seen science fiction before or Star Trek, this is actually probably pretty cool because you wouldn't have seen this story before. But I agree, though, it was exactly, and this whole thing is kind of just ripping off either Star Trek or other genres. So also in Star Trek. Later on, so starting in Next Generation, there's something called the Holodeck. And the Holodeck is basically a room that can create fantasy realities, right? So you can, it's basically like LARPing, where you're interacting with computer characters, like a video game that you're standing in, right? And so there are all these stories about, oh no, the holodeck is on the fritz and now it's dangerous and it's, we're stuck in here in this alternate reality. And it's a way to like put characters in Next Generation in like the Wild West or, Sherlock Holmes, like Moriarty famously like escapes the holodeck in Next Generation. But
he comes back in Picard season 3.
Oh my
alert.
God, stop. I can't believe that.
Yeah,
so they also do that basically where all of the characters are in a medieval dress, like a medieval fantasy kingdom.
It's one of the greatest
on board the Empire.
TNG, by the way.
No, on board the Enterprise here in Strange New Worlds.
You're talking about the episode.
Yeah, where they're in. So this time, except it's a alien nebula that like warps reality because they don't have a holodeck. Remember, it wasn't invented by this time in Star Trek. So they do what is effectively a holodeck episode, but they do it with an alien entity basically dressing everybody up in medieval fantasy and mind controlling them.
So Can I talk about that episode for a second? Because the funny thing is, like in TNG, when they would do a holodeck episode, it usually ended up being goofy. Like they were 1930s gangsters, or they were in Sherlock Holmes, or they were in Robin Hood, and you have Worf saying one of my favorite lines where, like, I think Geordi compliments how he looks and he goes, "I am not a merry man," and I think that's funny, if you know Robin. But this one, I have the episode list so I don't forget any of the names of the episode, but that's one called the Elysian Kingdom, and the thing that I dislike the most about that episode, and I really dislike it, maybe I want to hear your take on this too, is I feel like we get robbed of an end to Dr. Mbenga's story with his sick daughter. Because like the entire series has been like, oh, we got to find a cure. Is he going to find a cure? Or time is running out. And I feel like they kind of just were like Deus Ex Alien to solve this issue in kind of a sad way, right? Because it's like, well, she's fine, but she's also just gone. It felt very much like, oh man, we got this like sick kid plot and the season's almost over. Like, do we let this go another season? It's like, nah, just end it. Yeah.
So I didn't mind that because I hate stuff that breaks the established universe of a canon. So it's why I hated how in the new Star Wars movies they like go at light speed and destroy that Imperial ship.
That's messed up.
In episode 8, because it's like, why wouldn't you just do that at any other point in time in Star Wars if that was possible? So it kind of ruins the believability of the universe. And my problem with this episode and the concept of Mbenga's daughter being gravely ill and then being stored in the transporter is the question becomes, because remember, this in the Star Trek timeline happens before basically anything else besides Enterprise. But anyway, and I guess Discovery too, sort of. It's contemporaneous. But basically, like, if you could just store people who are terminally ill or injured in a transporter, why wouldn't you just do that at every other point in Star Trek?
Didn't they say something like he had like discovered how to do it and hadn't shared it or something? Because I know people got like stuck in the transporter like thing later on, right? People got stuck in like the pattern buffer or whatever they call it, you know, right? So I felt like it had precedent, but I'm not as familiar with the rules of the universe to say if this is okay or not.
I'm just saying it introduces some very interesting holes in the timeline where it's like, well, if this technology could exist, like, why wouldn't he share it, number one? Also, remember that he is even though he's a doctor, he's an officer on a military vessel. And if he's using military technology inappropriately or secretly, I don't think that's probably chill.
Well, that brings us back to another thing with Strange New Worlds, is that Captain Pike kind of plays fast and loose with the rules on his ship. Like, the etiquette on the bridge is very different in this than it was in like TNG. Like, you know, if Picard was like, we have to go to light speed and get there, and you know, whoever, like, Data turns around, Data wouldn't do this obviously, but if he turned around and was like, you sure, sir? That sounds like a pretty dumb idea. Picard would be like, get off my bridge. Where Pike is like, no, just trust me. It'll be. He lets people be a little bit more free with their language on the bridge.
I think it just depends on the captain. So first off, like, I think that's much more Kirk-esque in the Cavalier attitude. And yeah, it may not be a tight ship, but I think that there's different captains in different eras, right? And people have different relationships with their crew members. And I think Pike as a character is just one of the things I really like about this show is Pike's character and how he's more of an empathetic leader than anything else, right? He is very much about trying to connect with the crew members and win them over rather than being authoritarian or commanding.
He's really close to like Michael Scott from The Office, only much more competent. Where he desires to be friends with everyone under his employ. Yeah. You know? I feel like he's a more mature, competent Michael Scott of a captain. But this is one thing I do like about Star Trek. And again, to restate, I'm not really a Star Trek guy. I like a lot of Star Trek things, but I'm not like a massive fan of the IP. So I don't know a lot of things. But I do like how each captain kind of has their own style of running their ship, right? Yeah. And so that's so going back to what you were saying about Dr. Mbenga using the transporter to, keep his sick daughter in stasis essentially, and like why that's not a huge issue. I'm thinking that probably would be on other ships, but on the Enterprise under Pike, he's kind of like, yeah, we'll just kind of not talk about that, because he wants to be Dr. Mbenga's friend.
Yeah,
he needs people to like him. I will say though, Captain Pike has the greatest hair in Starfleet.
It is insane, isn't it?
It is.
I have mad hair jealousy for Ensign Mount. I look at his hair, I'm like, that man is beautiful, and that hair is fucking glorious.
You can't deny it. You really cannot deny it.
The weird thing is he doesn't look like that in real life in other pictures, so I want to know what they do to his hair in order to make it look like that. But yes,
maybe it's a wig. I don't think it's a wig. Maybe it's a wig.
It's not a wig. It's just highly paid hair professionals.
Yeah, I could not do that.
All right,
I don't have enough hair.
So we've talked about how like they kind of redid Aliens, and that was a little boring. But it was relatively well executed. Like I think they did a good job of injecting space horror. They have some of the more like fantasy episodes, like basically the holodeck episode where they're all in medieval fantasy land, and it's a departure. They've had some comedic episodes where they literally did Vulcan Freaky Friday, where Spock and where Spock and his fiancées switch bodies. So instead of Lindsay Lohan and Jamie Lee Curtis, the problem with that concept though is that when two people who are trying not to have emotions switch bodies, it's funny for like 3 seconds as a fish out of water, and it gets really boring because they don't have any different feelings about switching bodies, you know? And it's all about the practicality of switching back.
I will say that Spock has lots of feelings in this. I feel like Spock's feelings are like a main plot point to this entire show, right? Where it's like, now we're full on, we got angry Spock now, you know? Where he's unleashed the beast and he just doesn't know how to cage it again. You know? And I'm like, oh, Spock. But going back to Spock Amok, like, I think this is a rite of passage for every Star Trek series, based on what I've seen, is that you have to have a couple completely stupid episodes in your first season of Star Trek. And that's kind of, I feel like that's a good sign, because you see them kind of pushing what they want to do. Sure, it doesn't work out, but you see that they're willing to be a little bit silly. I mean, just look at like TNG, DS9, like, man, the chess episode of DS9, I think is one of the worst hours of television I've ever seen in my life.
The one where they get trapped, it's not chess, they get trapped in a board game. It is really,
it's 4D chess.
It is really chess. It is really bad. It is a very
it's Star
bad
Trek
episode.
chess. Yeah. But and you got those great like late 90s special effects with that too.
Terrible.
It really is. But I feel like that kind of episode is a must-have for the first season of a successful Star Trek show. See, Picard did it wrong because every episode was bad in the first season. You can't have every episode be bad. It's only like 1 or 2, and that's the mark of it, what's going to be a good series, right? But the problem is, in Picard, every episode in both seasons 1 and 2 were bad. And so you don't do that. They had to completely kind of reboot it for season 3, and that was good. But for other shows like TNG, DS9, I never really watched Voyager, but this one, I feel like that is the mark of what could be a good Star Trek show eventually, is to have a really insane episode in your first season.
I just don't understand why they couldn't explain to everybody involved that they had swapped bodies. Because
you think it's someone
first off,
Vulcan culture.
They don't look. Crazy things happen in Star Trek all the time to everybody, all the aliens. It's like, is it really that weird for them to walk up and just be like, hey guys, you know, we accidentally swapped bodies. It's part of Vulcans. We can actually kind of do this. And so we're going to have to switch out who's negotiating with these aliens. And you would think, especially because one of T'Pring's job is convincing like these Vulcans to like be logical again. Don't you think Vulcans would understand this if you just said like, hey, we swapped bodies. Vulcans can do that. It was an accident. We're trying to figure it out. Can't we just switch the people involved? So it just doesn't make sense on its face, this episode. And it's also not very interesting. It's not very exciting. And it tries to be funny, but it doesn't really succeed in doing that either.
It's like you're putting two of the least funny people on your show in a funny situation.
Exactly. And you try and make it fish out of water, but fish out of water only works when somebody is reacting like a fish out of water. But when they're intentionally trying not to display emotions, it just fails, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. It was that one was a struggle. That one was a struggle for sure.
It does the same thing, honestly, that DS9 chess-like game episode does too, where it blends ridiculous scenarios with completely unfunny, characters.
Yes.
And it's like, I know the characters in DS9 can be funny. They certainly were at other times in that series, but in that episode, nothing was funny. Nothing was entertaining. So and I really like DS9 too, but not that episode.
And also, I think as this closes out, one of the main plot points that ends the season and also sets up the next season, and especially the first episode, and why Captain Pike isn't even there really in the first episode, is that his executive officer, Una, who is played by Rebecca Romaine, is arrested because she comes from a race that was genetically engineered and then lied about it because you can't be genetically engineered and be part of Starfleet. This is a very long plot point that has been going on throughout many series. But when I say they're rehashing Star Trek, they are rehashing basically Julian Bashir, the Doctor in Deep Space Nine's arc, who is also genetically engineered and then caught by Starfleet. It wasn't his choice. His parents did it to him because he was basically, the plot point, for those of you guys who don't know, is he was like a special needs child. So his parents took him and got him illegally genetically engineered. So he became super intelligent. He has, superhuman reflexes, basically. he is super smart. He is a superhuman, basically. And so he eventually in Deep Space Nine ends up in trouble for that, but they don't end up kicking him out of Starfleet. And in fact, one of the major story arcs towards the end of Deep Space Nine is he is then actively recruited by Section 31, who is the shadow intelligence agency of Starfleet, because they want him because he is exceptional to basically do espionage and covert ops for them. So we've already seen this play out, is the point. So like now, and you know, it was clearly against protocol because she knew and she lied and to Starfleet in order to get in, which is now what is most likely going to come up in the next few episodes of Strange New Worlds, which is Pike going to try and like help her, which I think is ridiculous, because if she knowingly lied to get into Starfleet and was going against Starfleet protocols, why would a military organization be like, yeah, you know what? It's one exception's fine, guys. That's not how militaries work.
This is very Captain Pike, though, right? Because he's in the Dungeons and Dragons spectrum of personalities. He's very much chaotic good, right? Where he appreciates that rules are there and he's happy to follow them. But when he feels he can do good and that is outside of the rules, he won't really hesitate to jump out and do that, right? Which is also kind of another, point in this first episode of Strange New Worlds.
Let's move on to the first episode of Strange New Worlds.
Should we do that?
So hold on.
Okay.
So your take on the first season? I thought it was kind of derivative.
Yeah.
But it was relatively well executed. I think it had some really low lows, like the Spock Freaky Friday episode.
Spock amok.
But also I think some of the Gordon stuff was pretty well done, particularly like the first Gordon episode where they're like hiding in the nebula from the spaceships and they're playing that game of cat and mouse. That one was really cool. I actually liked the holodeck episode. I thought that was interestingly done. I liked where they were cracking the code. The episode where they were, I think it's the first episode or the second episode where they're cracking the code, where Uhura's cracking the code about the sound on the asteroid or whatever. So I think it was like pretty good. I would give this, if I had to give it a Star Trek officer ranking, I would give it a lieutenant. 2 picks for the first season.
All right. I should look up rankings so I don't get it wrong when I do a ranking. Hold on. Well, anyway, I'll just have you correct it. I'll figure it out.
Ensign, lieutenant, junior grade, lieutenant commander, commander, captain.
Wow, admiral above that, right?
Sure, yeah.
Admiral, that'd be very high praise. But so I will expand on what I said earlier with season 1, where I think it is very much the Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens of Star Trek, where we have familiar tropes, we have familiar universe, a couple touch points for existing fans, but a lot of new faces. To expand on that, just like Episode 7 of Star Wars, it has a lot of new characters that I like. I really like the crew of the Enterprise as it exists in Strange New Worlds. I think it's cool that we're seeing expansions on characters like Uhura, right? Especially in the linguistic side of things, because I really like languages, so I think that's really cool that her character does, and I like that they actually made that a major plot point of that one episode and kind of have that be a continuing thing that she's really good at, because it's important in the Star Wars universe. Languages are, super vital when you're dealing with a bunch of aliens, right? But then all the other characters, like I said, are cool. I like all of the characters. I think they're all unique and interesting in their own way, and they all kind of got their moments in season 1 to a certain extent, enough that I'm curious where all of their personal stories go in season 2. So, I think I'm gonna have to agree with you on the ensign rank for it, where it's like they're in.
I give it lieutenant.
Like well, I'm gonna give it ensign. All right.
Wow, that's the lowest. That's the lowest officer.
And here's why. Wow. Let me explain myself, because I know I like the series a little.
Would be like the lowest.
I like the series a little bit less than you do, but again, I like Star Trek a little bit less than you do. But ensign, the reason is because just like an ensign in Starfleet, they've made it in. They're part of Starfleet, but they have yet to prove themselves.
What would you have given Picard season 1?
Picard season 1,
like Academy dropout, Starfleet Academy dropout.
I would have given them the rank of. I would have given them the rank of like a bucket of Borg pieces. Like that's it. They're not even in Star. They're like a defunct broken Borg. Like that is season 1 and 2. Or maybe a more appropriate for Picard season 1 would be a bucket of broken Data pieces.
Okay.
But so it's they're not even in the conversation. Like Picard season 1 and 2, it was kind of just like a train. It was a typical stereotypical train wreck you couldn't look away from kind of thing, where it's like I watched it over a while to like after a while to just see how bad it could get, you know, which is the type of thing I do to myself with the content I consume, and you don't do, but the world will thank me later.
Well,
But
I'm gonna have to start doing it
now.
now. I'm gonna have to start doing it now. Okay, so let's get into.
I won't make you go back and watch that.
So I was encouraged, like you said, because even though there were some kind of bad episodes, there were some decent episodes in season 1. I thought it was an okay show, and I thought it might be able to go somewhere because, as you referenced, famously Star Trek shows, especially very good ones like Next Gen and Deep Space Nine, really did struggle in their first couple of seasons to like find their footing, find their identity.
That's fine.
And like, you know, if we're honest, like both DS9 and TNG really didn't get very good until season 4 or 5. A lot of the time.
Season 3 with TNG, like a couple sparse episodes in 1 and 2, but season 3 is where it picked up for me. But
so I mean, it picks up, but I think like a lot of the gold standard episodes that we recognize from those shows come from the later seasons. I think it's fair to say. So anyway, I was looking forward to this new season.
You were excited. I have to state this. Like, Monty doesn't generally get excited about this type of thing. He's more of the opinion, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're more of the opinion where you would just rather people make new things. You're tired of old things being rehashed. But you were excited about Strange New Worlds season 2, more than I've seen you be excited about something in a long time.
So I do admit a weakness on that front to Star Trek, because I just want there to be good Star Trek, and I especially want there to be good Star Trek post Deep Space Nine. So I don't really like this timeline, to be fair. Like, original series, pre-original series is not my jam. My jam is Next Gen, DS9, Voyager era, and then I wanted to see what they did next, because I'm interested in the evolution of the Star Trek universe, not endlessly repeating all the stuff that happened in the past.
Well, that's Picard.
I know, but I didn't want that. Really so it turned out I didn't want that either. But anyway, I was excited about this, but this first episode is really bad. It's probably the worst episode. It's not even probably. It is the worst episode of Strange New World so far. I had a glass of wine, and I was just watching it and mauling aggressively and like shouting at my television in the middle of the night because it was just so terrible. So let me explain how this starts, because it is so awful. Okay?
Go ahead.
So first off, they don't even have all the characters. So Pike just pieces out to go help his executive officer, Una, right? Who's now in basically military prison because she lied about being genetically engineered. So already the first 2 officers on the ship are just gone, okay? The security chief, Lon Noonien Singh, who saved the Star Trek equivalent of Newt from Aliens from the Gorn in the last season, has gone on leave to take the Star Trek equivalent of Newt from the Aliens to her parents, right? So she's gone. So we're already missing like 3 characters. Also, they killed one of the characters from the last series, so that character's also gone. So you can see we're already dealing with a very small pool of characters who could actually like exist in this first episode, right?
Wait, who did they kill?
Hemmer, the engineer, the Andorian guy.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
He was actually one of the better characters too. I liked him.
He was an okay character.
All right. Well, anyway, let's ignore that. Yeah. we're past
all right.
that.
Wow. So I guess I wasn't struck by that emotional moment very much, was I?
I guess you were. So they get this. The premise is so stupid, guys. Okay. So Spock is like they're in space dock with Spock, and they're getting repairs on the Enterprise. And they get a transmission from Lon Noonien Singh, their former chief of security, who's on leave delivering the not Newt character from Aliens to her parents. And
Oriana is the character's name.
Okay, Oriana from League of Legends. So this girl, so they get a transmission saying like, the Federation is in grave danger. Please come to this planet immediately. But I won't bore you with the details. The thrust of it is this. The planet is under Klingon control. It's a mining planet called Kajitar 4. And they're mining dilithium there. And they have this kind of like shared agreement with the Federation. But the Klingons are currently in control of it. And if they go there, then what happens is the Klingons would potentially declare war and start a new Klingon Federation war, which is obviously super serious shit. You know, there's a political agreement governing this world because it has valuable resources that they need to build warp drives, basically, both the Klingons and the Federation. So what happens is, this is where it starts to completely fall apart, Doa. Spock goes to the Admiral who's on this starbase and is like, hey, Admiral, like, can I go to this planet with our skeleton crew and like check out this message? And he's like, fuck no, you can't. Of course not. That will start a war. Are you dumb? We have to wait a month until we get access to this planet again, and then we'll check it out. Like a vague message that they can't even confirm is from this person.
Yeah. How do they even know it's from La'an?
The Admiral, by the way, has a completely logical take. Completely logical. Yeah. And Spock's like, I feel like being illogical as a Vulcan.
Well, it's because he's angry. It's because his emotions are unleashed, and he just has a hard time, you know, controlling that stuff. He's dealing with a lot. He likes Nurse Chapel, but he still has kind of a thing for Pring, and he was like in her body for a while, like as her, you know, in that way. And so he's very confused. He's a very confused Vulcan human.
Yes.
Human Vulcan.
But the point is that he behaves completely illogically off of very scant evidence that might also be falsified in the first place.
Because of emotion, Monty. It's because of emotion.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then they fake a warp core breach so that they can leave the station, and then they just warp out as a conspiracy. So what this is, by the way, guys, is mutiny, which I don't know if you know. Yeah. In navies, typically mutiny is punished by death. Okay.
Wait. It's okay though. It's okay because Professor Carol Kane is on the scene, and she showed up and was like, I'm a professor. I want to go on an adventure because I'm hundreds of years old. Let's go. And they're like, well, if she said it's okay, it's like, well, if the teacher said it's okay, I guess we can steal the ship. By the way, Carol Kane is awesome, and I was so happy to see her show up. For those of you who don't know, she was one of the main characters in the Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt show on Netflix, which was kind of like the spiritual successor
she's a very
to 30
famous
Rock
actress.
in a way. Yeah, and she's been in a billion other things. She's got a very long storied career, and she's got a really unique and amazing voice, and she's such a fun person to see show up and stuff. So I'm glad she's in Strange New Worlds. I was very happy to see her show up.
Yeah.
And she said it was okay to take the ship, so it's okay.
So basically, like, she just rocks up because they don't have an engineer because they killed their previous one. And she's like, yeah, you shouldn't simulate this warp core breach this way. Let's steal the ship. And you're like, why would you want to do that? Like, literally all these people. And she's she's like, oh, you have a hunch, Spock Vulcan. Well, I'm going to sacrifice my prestigious Starfleet career on your hunch, even though I just fucking met you. And so they go off. So they steal this ship, right? And they go to this planet. And in the most confusing part of this, so remember that Spock already asked the Admiral to go to this planet. Mm-hmm. So the Admiral knows exactly where he's going. It's not a mystery, guys. Like, if you're like, if the Admiral was like, where'd the Enterprise go? I guess they didn't explode from that warp core breach that they were having. Yeah. He's like, I wonder where they could have flown off to. Like, you would immediately just send your fleet to this planet where they said he told you they were going there.
Monty, you don't want to start a war. So they have to be like, well, I just hope they don't start a war then.
But here's what would actually happen. Okay, let's pretend this was so this is a Cold War scenario. So let's play this out as if it's the Soviet Union versus America. And let's just say, this is how ridiculous this is, guys. Let's just say the flagship. So in the Cold War, some captain steals an aircraft carrier with his crew after telling them, like, hey guys, I'm just gonna sail over, towards the Soviet Union right now. I'm just gonna go patrol like up and down the Pacific coast of the Soviet Union. So you know where he's going, right? So here's what happens. The president immediately gets on the hotline to the Kremlin and says, hey guys, we have a rogue ship. It's heading towards you. We don't want to go to war, okay? Like, it's rogue. We can't do anything about it. We're chasing it right now. Can you guys like destroy it for us? Like, you feel free, just kill this ship, right? They would immediately just call the Klingons or send a messenger and be like, hey, Klingons, like, we don't want a war here, but our ship was stolen. Like, fair game if you guys kill it. That's what would actually happen in this scenario.
But instead, they don't do anything. And we assume that although we do kind of have a clue as to why they may not have done anything at the end, where they're like, the admiral's talking to maybe the other admiral or whatever, and they look at the thing, it's like, uh-oh, the Gorn. So maybe he was just really preoccupied thinking about the Gorn, and that's why he didn't think about the other war that could have broken out. You got a lot of wars to think about.
So they go to this planet, right? And then they discover that for some reason the miners on this planet, like the people who are mining the dilithium, not children.
Not the young people.
That's the joke from Galaxy Quest, very famously. Miners,
Right,
not miners. Anyway, but yes, the miners on this planet are taking technology, right? They're buying Federation technology. So it's a bunch of Klingons who are buying Federation technology so that they can create a Federation ship to start a false flag operation where they build a Federation ship, which apparently isn't hard, and like a bunch of miners can do it. Like, this is so ridiculous. So it would be like a bunch of miners building an aircraft carrier without a military shipyard.
Oh, also, they have to do it really fast, too, because remember, the Klingon and the Federation trade control of this planet, presumably over not too long of a span of time. So they got to build the ship really quick, too. So yeah, how did they get the blueprints? How did they get that many resources? We know they have dilithium, so sure.
How do they have so much money that they can build like a military-grade vessel? Right. And so their intention is to take this fake Federation starship, attack the Klingons, restart the war, so that the miners can make more money from this planet. Which I don't know how that would happen, because if it's a contested planet for resources and it's on the border, you would assume that there would be like a lot of fighting there and nobody would be able to mine there. That's what I would assume, is that it would be bombed or something, right? So it doesn't make any sense. So they build this ship. It's so stupid, guys. So they build this fake ship, and then because they don't have it. Remember, they don't have any characters in this episode. Oh, I forgot where they stole something again from another franchise. So they stole the opening scene, or one of the opening scenes from Raiders of the Lost Ark, where what's her name, Marion, is drinking in that bar in Nepal, having that drinking competition.
Yeah, that's right.
Where she's like out drinking that guy, and then it's the exact same thing with La'an Noonien Singh and this Klingon, where it's
you knew it was going to happen. Yeah, you knew what was going to happen.
But it's literally the same scene. So they stole. It's another scene that they just shamelessly stole from another franchise. It's irrelevant, by the way. They could just not have that scene; it would be fine. So they go. Okay, so they don't have any characters.
Or have it be something in universe too, right? I mean, yeah, we know Klingon blood wine is a thing, but like have it be, some sort of Klingon game, right? Where maybe they're throwing knives at each other or something, like
it's
something
literally
Klingons would do. Yeah,
and
we do that.
It's pointless, and it is a rehash of a very famous scene that already exists from a much better movie. So because they have no characters, they have to send the doctor and the nurse to go infiltrate this fake Federation ship.
I love this.
And by the way, so
part.
in the same way, DoA, that I said that I hate things that break the canon, like the established canon, as in like if you could put somebody in a transporter to just have them in stasis forever if they have a terminal disease or a fatal injury, why hasn't that been used in other parts of Star Trek? So they inject themselves. So the nurse and the doctor inject themselves with this goo, right? And they became superheroes, and they basically just take on a bunch of Klingons. So remember, the nurse is like a 120-pound woman, and she is just like decking like 4 Klingon warriors at the same time, which also just raises the question of, if they have this technology, why do they even care about a war with the Klingons? They could just
own them. You could just juice everyone up and like go, fist fight the Klingons, I guess. But it goes on for so long. I mentioned this earlier, where it is so long, and like the choreography is not very good. It's a lot of very typical like, here's my big elbow thing, and the reason I'm hitting you with my elbow is because I've got a costume with these like tassels that flow out, and it looks really cool in slow motion. And then like it starts to wear off, and she punches someone. It's like, oh, that hurts my hand. Well, it's like, doesn't that mean that by that point that like probably all the bones in both of your hands are broken at this point?
Yeah, like exactly.
Yeah, and I mean,
but if they have the special fighting juice, why haven't they used this in every version of Star Trek ever? Wouldn't it have been much easier just to fight Klingons this way in any other episode of Star Trek?
Or fight the Gorn?
Yeah,
when you're hanging out, bring this along wherever you go. You can just like, strangle a Gorn and just choke it out.
Why did you use it then?
Yeah, maybe Hemmer would still be alive, and I wouldn't have forgotten he existed if they had the Federation juice, the Federation StarCraft stim pack to use,
So like,
it literally just
It was a Deus Ex Machina. It was terrible.
Yeah. I was kind of wondering about it because they got to that scene. I'm like, well, how are they going to get out of this? And then they're like, oh, we just happen to have this stuff that we can shoot up with and become like a super street fighting doctors for a little while. I'm like, well, okay. So now, because at this point, that it is a concerning scene because it means that they think that they can just write themselves out of situations for the rest of the series, right? So that it does make me wonder, like, are we going to get a good season or not? Because if they've done this, then who's to stop them from just writing in something to like get their characters out of other situations? It's like, let's not find a real solution. Let's just be like, oh man, I wish we had like the key card to this. And then they look over and they're like, what's that stuck between two panels? It's like, oh my gosh, when one of them were running down the hall, they brushed into the panel and their key card got stuck in there. What a coincidence. I guess we can get out now. Like, that's the kind of thing that I'm worried about happening from now on in this series. It is a scary precedent to set. All right, Strange New Worlds. I know the season's already written. It's too late now. We're just gonna wait and see how it unfolds. But
it was terrible. So they broke the entire Star Trek timeline by having this like super drug in there that allows you to fight like 20 Klingons at once, which they definitely should have used at every other single point that they were fighting Klingons or Jem'Hadar or whoever was much stronger than people throughout the entire Star Trek canon.
All the time, like he's the kind of guy that
why stop using it, honestly?
Yeah, I mean, like did they talk about any drawbacks to it in the episode? I don't think so.
They didn't say anything about it. They just juiced themselves and started punching Klingons. They were like, oh, it's wearing off now.
Right. Like I feel like it needed a little bit more exposition. Like maybe I need to go back and watch.
Maybe I missed it, but it was very confusing.
Yeah, I don't remember any drawbacks to it, right?
Anyway,
like if
maybe it'll come up in the future. So they go basically the Doctor like they blow up this ship before it can attack this Klingon ship, and then you know Spock is there because he's in command of the ship, right? And he talks to the Klingon commander, and he's like, they basically just become friends because Spock likes drinking.
Yeah, they're like, hey, this Klingon drinks. It's like, what, you didn't know? I mean, I'm pretty sure Klingons not Klingons, Vulcans. I'm pretty sure Vulcans drink in general, you know?
Yeah.
But they're like, well, so the moral of this story, Monty, is that all problems can be solved with just getting drunk.
That's been true in my life.
I don't know. We don't want to set that precedent, being that this is essentially Fisher-Price Star Trek. It's my first Star Trek, right? Do we really want to be telling the kids that this is how you solve your problems?
But my favorite,
that everyone just gets along better with drinking.
Yes, I mean I want the kids to understand that, but
it works until it doesn't. Basically,
so
you know?
Basically they're like, yo, you like drinking? Well, I also like drinking, so let's go get drunk on this planet, and it'll be cool, and like we'll pretend that this whole thing didn't happen, and your Federation ship wasn't just randomly in Klingon territory. But it's okay because I kind of believe, but not really believe, that you saved us from this false flag operation. But here's the worst part, though. Here's the worst part. At the end, remember, let's talk about the crimes they committed. They stole a warship on a hunch, flew it over, almost started a war in what was effectively a Cold War between the Klingons and the Federation. And yeah, they stopped the false flag operation. But also, they should never have been there in the first place. And at the end, Spock calls the Admiral, and the Admiral's like, "Yo, Spock, you hungover, buddy?" And Spock's like, "Yeah."
Right.
And then the Admiral's like, "Well, let that hangover be your punishment for mutiny."
Lots of dangerous precedents being set in this episode, Monty.
So basically, Starfleet's like, well, anybody can have a hunch and steal our warships and mutiny, but if you're right, your punishment is a hangover from the great time you had drinking with the Klingons afterwards.
You know what happened?
There's no court-martial. There's no investigation. I mean, in a real military, think about this way. In my analogy earlier about the aircraft carrier, if a captain went off and did this, and then at the end, they stopped the fake American destroyer from attacking the Soviet ships, right? And then Stalin called them and was like, yo, you want to get a drink? And the captain's like, yeah, Stalin, let's go drink some vodka. And then they go and he gets drunk with Stalin. And then he calls up, I don't know, JFK in this example. He's like, hey, Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy's like, oh man, you sound hungover, Captain. He's like, yeah, I drank a lot with Stalin last night. And Kenny's like, well, why don't you just come on home with that aircraft carrier? That vodka hangover is your punishment. Naughty, naughty.
No, you have to. So two things here. One, that you have to understand the beautiful symmetry in the writing of this episode, that we begin with a drinking scene that is showing a conflict between the Federation and the Klingons, and we end with a drinking scene showing unity between the Federation and the Klingons. See, it comes full circle. It's beautiful. It's like poetry. It rhymes, right? Yeah. But also, I know why the Admiral did what he did, and the clue comes from Spock amok. What happened was Pike. We didn't see where Pike was. Him and the Admiral. I don't know how to happen. Him and the Admiral. I've been drinking with Klingons. They switched bodies. And so that was actually Pike in the Admiral's body. And because that was very Pike-like for him to be like, your hangover is enough punishment for you, Spock, old pal. Yeah, that's what happened.
And by the way, at the end, he's like, gets off the phone with Spock. He's like, whew, at least we didn't have a war on two fronts with the Klingon. And there's like this little thing that shows like a Gorn shift. I'm like, really? Gorn. That's your reaction? That's your reaction? You're like, well, at least we only have one war now, guys. High fives, high fives, high fives. Like,
I felt like I felt like they were about to do like the sitcom, like dun 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 dun, like at that point where it feels like that kind of a moment, right? And like the thing is I was hoping it would be Romulans. I was hoping like the Romulans would start to cause trouble or whatever. I don't know where that would fit in the Star Trek timeline, but the Gorn are so boring. They're just alien, all right? They're just kind of angry lizards that jump out of people.
For now. I mean, hopefully they get more interesting.
I guess. Like the earlier episode in season 1 where they were trying to evade the Gorn ship, that was cool.
Yeah, that was a good episode.
But like the Gorn we saw in the Aliens episode was just super boring and super generic. So I'm like, not more Gorn.
For sure. But yeah, so I mean, hopefully the Gorn get more interesting. I think there's plenty of ways you can make them more interesting as the show goes on and add some depth there potentially. Maybe add some sympathetic qualities to them as well. But my other problem with this is like to the Gorn. Yeah, I mean, who knows what they can do with it? I think there's potentially ways.
If any IP can give sympathetic feelings to a race of lizard people that burst out of people, it's Star Trek. They can do it.
Yeah, I can't truly believe that.
You can't spell Gorn without OR. And you know what else you can't spell without OR in Star Trek? Borg, exactly. So maybe it's a breadcrumb. It's an Easter egg pointing to the Borg coming out. I'm just trying to convince myself we're not gonna have to watch a whole season of Gorn fights. I'm just, so I'm just trying to tell myself that.
So, this episode was terrible. It's also not even the only or best false flag operation Star Trek episode. If again, I'll go back to my favorite, which is Deep Space Nine, but one of, if not arguably the very best episode ever of Deep Space Nine is an episode called In the Pale Moonlight, where Sisko is basically orchestrating a false flag operation to convince the Romulans to enter the war with the Dominion by creating he creates fake documents, like a fake recording of the Dominion saying that they were going to invade Romulus with the Cardassians, and he tries to give it to a Romulan ambassador who discovers it's a fake, and then Garrick has to blow up his shuttle to make it look like the Dominion assassinated him to prevent this information from getting to the Romulans. Then the Romulans decide to enter the war, even though they wouldn't have. So basically, it's Starfleet creating fake evidence in a false flag operation to convince the Romulans, because otherwise they're going to lose the Dominion War. And it is a fucking mega episode because it's extremely well done. And the stakes are established because this war is very serious. War is not treated seriously at all in this episode. It's like another bloody war with the Klingons. Ha ha! Let's get a drink. Like, it's ridiculous.
Maybe it's a drinking war. Maybe that's why the Federation knows the Klingons would win that. So Lon can't outdrink everyone.
So anyway, this episode was truly awful.
But let's talk about Star Trek: Strange New Worlds. Da, 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 da. Right.
So yeah, I don't know. I was really disappointed by this because this sets the stakes of so many things that you would hope become major plot arcs and treats them really frivolously. And to me, that's the most disappointing part. It wasn't just kind of like a stupid body switching episode where we can forget about it. Like, we really can't forget about the stakes of stealing the Enterprise and almost starting like an interstellar war. And even the Admiral's like, I didn't really care about that.
He's worried about the Gorn. But like I said, a lot of dangerous precedents being set in this episode. That what you just talked about, the fact that they can just sort of invent drugs in the moment to help them like have these big random fight scenes because we just need some action, I guess. And what the Klingons aren't upset about that at all. Like some of those Klingons are still going to be around, right? I mean, so it's a lot of dangerous precedents being set thematically.
Also, nobody asked for Doctor Nurse epic fight scene. Nobody wanted that.
No, and the thing is, they don't need that. We don't need Chaplin and Benga to be like awesome fighters. They're cool characters in their own right with their own unique storylines that have been started last season. Like, we don't need them to be fighters. Not everyone needs to fight.
I really felt that we were missing out from the Dr. Crusher fight scenes in Next Generation.
Yeah, that's right. Why didn't we? Well, watch Picard season 3 then. But
no.
Yeah, why didn't we? When Scotty showed up on TNG for that one episode, I forget what the name of the episode was. It is a good episode. Why didn't he have a fight scene? There was drinking, but why didn't he have a fight scene?
I'm just I don't need Geordi LaForge Dr. Crusher fight scenes. Like, I just don't need that from Star Trek The Next Generation.
I want to see Ambassador Sarek break someone's neck with his bare hands. That's what I need in my Star Trek.
Well,
like, that's the thing.
To be fair, Vulcans are much stronger than humans. So,
well, he would just do the pinch thing, and then then he'd be good. But or you'd mind meld and become friends, or swap bodies, I guess. But that is the thing. Is that, and maybe this is where I feel like there's a little bit of Batman and Robin sneaking through there, and I think this is going to be a theme when we talk about Strange New World season 2. Is that we have to watch for the BNR moments, the Batman and Robin moments, right? Where there's things like
Batman Forever as well, by the way. So it's not just Batman and Robin. It's even worse.
And in a superhero movie, everybody needs to fight. Everyone needs their fight scene, apparently. I don't agree with that, but that seems to be the theme, right? So, is that going to be what Star Trek is now? Everyone needs their fight scene. And by the way, you can have an action scene without fighting. It is possible, right? So we just need a little bit more creativity. There was so much more interesting ways that they could have had Chaplin and Benga get out of that situation, and instead they just did like the scene from like The Raid or like Old Boy, where they're just like fighting things. So that Daredevil episode, they're just fighting a bunch of people in a hallway, and like another talk about tropes that we've lifted from other things and have found in Strange New Worlds. That's another great example right there.
Yeah,
but it was doctors. No one's done it with doctors before. Not even Dr. House got that violent.
No more doctor fights. All right. So that was our disappointment in the first week. You have any final thoughts? I give that episode a Starfleet Academy flunked out rank. That's my rank for that.
That's like Wesley's classmate when they got caught doing the illegal maneuver that got their classmate.
It's a great episode, by the way. Really
fantastic.
Really good episode. Next Gen.
Yeah, but the students that got expelled. Yeah, that is the level. I mean, I was gonna give it cadet, but when you said that, I'm like, you're right. I don't think this would even be in Star Trek, and it's definitely not Picard bad. It's not Picard season 1 and 2 bad. So it's not a box of rusty data parts. It's not that bad. No, it's way better than both seasons.
Wow.
Combined, I would say. Picard season 1 and 2 were that bad, but I would give it a hungover Klingon on the floor next to his cot that didn't quite make it into his bed before passing out. That's the rank I would give it.
All right. Well, we'll be back next week, guys, with the second episode of Strange New Worlds. We'll do an episode of Black Mirror, and we'll start Secret Invasion, which apparently is not very good. So probably more anger.
So we've heard.
Anyway, thanks for joining us on Nerd Legion. Please subscribe, leave a comment below, etc. Juice the algorithm for us. Thanks for watching.